Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Shabbos Daf Kuf Ches is divided neatly in half by a Mishnah. From the beginning of the Daf until the Mishnah has a couple of things going on. We're returning to a discussion about the skin of various creatures and whether they are considered halachically to have a skin that is independent and significant than the flesh, or is the skin soft and considered to be part of the flesh is not a separate thing. The Gemara is going to discuss the skin of birds. The Gemara is going to discuss the skin of fish. Then we'll have a story of how Shmuel met Rav, and in that story will come up the halachos of the skin of non-kosher animals. And we'll finish the story and then continue that discussion to some extent. Now, up to now we had seen the halachos of skin as it relates to tumah, and as it relates to making a wound on Shabbos. If the animal has a significant skin, you cannot wound it on Shabbos. This is another halacha that's involved, and that's if there is a skin, you should be able to use it as parchment to write Torah, Tefillin, Mezuzos, and things like that. So the Gemara now says that Rav Huna said you're allowed to write Tefillin on the skin of a bird. So the Gemara says, of course you are. We learned in the Mishnah that if you injure a bird, you break skin, you cause a chavala on Shabbos, that's an Isser D'Oraisa. So then for sure there is a significant skin there. Why shouldn't you be allowed to make tefillin out of it? So the Gemara says, Abai says the issue wasn't whether they have skin or not. The issue was the fact that the skin has holes. Where you pull out the big wing feathers, you leave holes. And the question is, can you write tefillin? There's going to be holes there because the ink isn't going to be where the holes are, so the letters are missing. So the chiddush is that you are allowed to. Since the holes are small enough, since the ink fills the hole and it seals it up, the holes are small enough for that to be able to happen, and therefore it's not a problem of missing skin where you have the holes. Now the Gemara has two versions of the next steps. It's Rav Zera and Abaye. Either Rav Zera was asking a kasha and Abaye was answering, or Rav Zera was bringing a raya and Abaye was rejecting it. So the first version is as follows. Rav Zera says we have a pasuk talking about the hakrava, and you brought on the mizbeach a carbon oila sa'if, and there it says from the next word biknafav. In the pasuk it says that you are supposed to throw the skin together with the bird into the fire. You do not have to separate the skin first. If you have an animal, you have to take the skin off. The skin is not flesh. You only burn the flesh in the fire of the mizbeach. But for a bird, you throw in the skin together with it. You don't have to skin it first. So Rabbi Zera says, how could you tell me that a bird has skin? If a bird has skin, so then how could you throw it into the fire? Only flesh is supposed to be in the fire. So Abba answered, what are you talking about? The pasuk is telling you that even though it has skin, here it's different. It's Xeris HaKasav that says that even though it has skin, still in this case, he's supposed to throw it into the fire. Now the other version of this is that Rabbi Zera argued that point specifically. He said, I will prove that a bird must have skin, because the pasuk comes and says that you should put the skin in the fire together with the flesh. Obviously it's considered like the same halacha as flesh as far as burning it. So obviously it has skin. If it didn't have skin, meaning if we halachically viewed its skin as part of the flesh, I wouldn't need a pasuk to tell me you have to put it in the fire. Of course it is. It's halachically flesh. And on that, Abaye says not necessarily. It could be that even though it has halachic, it has no halachic skin, that halachically its skin is not considered separate from the flesh, but since it does have holes, I would have thought that you shouldn't put it in the fire because it's not befitting for the mizbeach to receive something full of holes. And on that, the pasuk comes and says, no, you should put it in the fire anyway. Okay, now the Gemara turns to fish. So the Gemara says, Mar b'Ravina Esrach and Bar Yitzchak, are you allowed to write tefillin on the skin of a fish? So he said, when Eliyahu Hanavi will come, then we'll know. So he says, what do you mean, when Eliyahu Hanavi will come? We don't learn halachos from Eliyahu Hanavi. We need things that we don't understand the science of it, or the mitzias, the reality of it. We need Eliyahu to fill us in on that information. But halacha is not decided by Eliyahu, so what's the issue here? What piece of scientific information are we missing? We're not sure if there is actual scientific skin on a fish. What do you mean? You have ate a fish, you can see that there's skin there. Not only that, but there's even a Mishnah that says that there's skin in the fish, because it says that the skin of a fish blocks tumah. Anything from the water blocks tumah. So you see that there's a skin on the fish. So what do I need Eliyahu for? So the answer is we need Elio to tell me if it's going to stop smelling. The skin of a fish has a bad smell. You don't want that smell in your tefillin. So we have to see if the smell will last once the skin has dried. Okay, now the Gemara gets to an interesting incident of how Shmuel and Rav had their first meeting. The Gemara says that Shmuel and a Talmud of his named Karna were sitting on the banks of a river called Malka. The river came from the west, from Eretz Yisrael, to Bavel, where they were. And Shmuel saw that the water in the river was unclear. So the Rishonim, how you understand what happened here? We'll go with Taisus' pshat. He saw that the water was unclear, and he heard that a great person was traveling from Eretz Yisrael, and he figured he was on the way via the boat, and he knew that he would probably drink the water of the river. He wouldn't see that it was dirty water, and therefore he would probably get sick. He would have a serious case of indigestion. So Shmuel told Karna, listen, if he's a Talmud Chacham, it will be befitting for me to invite him to my house. If I can invite him to my house, then I can heal him with a certain procedure of food. Shmuel, Rashi says, new medical treatment. So he told Karna, go meet him and test him out, see if he's a real Talmud Chacham or not, like people say he is. So Shmuel went, and it was Rav, and he asked him a few things. First of all, he asked him something related to our discussion earlier, which is why this is here. How do you know that you're not allowed to write tefillin on the skin of a non-kosher animal? So he said, because it says that the Torah should be on something which is beficha, something which you can eat. That's why you can't use skin of a non-kosher animal. Then he asked him, how do you know that blood, that need the blood, has to be red? Who said that blood is defined as, whenever we see the word blood, it has to be red? So he said, it says that Mayav saw that the water was red like blood. So you see that blood is red? Okay, then he asked him, how do you know that a bris milah is supposed to be performed in the place that it is? Maybe a circumcision is referring to cutting off something else from some other part of the body. How do you know? So he said, very simple. The word orlosai appears by bris, and the word orlosai appears by arla, referring to the fruits of a tree. And we linked the two. Just like arla is referring to fruits, so arla has to be referring to the part of the body which produces fruits, meaning children. So he said to him, what do you mean? The word oral appears other places as well. You have orel umaltem is orlas lavavchem, that's on the heart, and we have the word orel by the ear. It says vayishmu hine arela oznam. So he said to him, here it says orlosoi by bris milah and orlosoi by fruits. The other places it says orlas or arela. It doesn't say the same word, and therefore the drasha is properly to fruits. So now the Gemara says that Rav was upset that he was being quizzed like this, and he asked him, he said, what's your name? He said, Karna is my name. He said, you should get a Karna in your eye, and he grew a kind of a horn of flesh in his eye. That was a curse that Rav put on him. Anyway, what happened was that Shmuel invited him to his house, and Shmuel fed him barley bread and sardines, and he gave him a lot of beer to drink, and he refused to show him where the bathroom was. So what ended up happening was that all these things drayed around in his stomach, and that was the cure for the indigestion that he had. But Rav wasn't aware that Shmuel was trying to cure him. He thought Shmuel was trying to pain him, so he cursed him, and he said, whoever is causing me this agony should not have sons. And the Rabbi Chananel adds is that Rav Shmuel never had a son because of that. But when Rav later figured out that Shmuel was just trying to heal him, he consoled Shmuel for the fact that he caused him to not have a son. Okay, now the Gemara discusses more at length what questions were asked there. First of all, the Gemara says that the source for the halacha that bris milah is supposed to be in the place that it is, and not somewhere else, is actually a machlekes. One is the opinion that Rav said, like it says orlasai. That is the opinion of Rav Yeshaya. Rabbi Nassan has a different source. It says when it describes bris milah, it says orel zochar. It says zochar asher lo imo. It has to be in males. Obviously, it's referring to something that only males have. Okay. Now the Gemara goes to the question that he asked him about not writing tefillin on the skin of non-kosher animals, and we have a brisa. The brisa says the following thing: that you're allowed to use a kosher animal or a kosher wild animal, wild or domestic, to make the parchment. For tefillin, also to use their hair to wrap the parashios in and to sew the boxes shut with their sinews. So halachah Moshe Sinai, that you're supposed to use the hair and the sinews for that. Now, you're not allowed to use non-kosher animals, non-kosher species that is, but you are allowed to use a nevela and treifa. Nevela is an animal that died without shchita, and treifa is one that had an injury. These are both non-kosher, but they are kosher species. So the Gemara says that a baisusi, a tzeduki, asked Rabbi Yeshua Hagarsi. He says, how do you know this halacha that you have to use kosher animals? He says, because like Rav said, Lamantia teres Hashem b'ficha. It has to be something that you could have in your mouth, something that you could eat. So he says, so then how come you're allowed to use nevelis and treifas? That's also non-kosher. Even though it's a kosher species, you aren't allowed to eat those animals. So he said, I'll tell you a mashal, a parable. If you have two people that are sentenced to execution, one is executed by the king himself and one is executed by the executioner, which one's on a higher level? So he said, certainly the one who's executed by the king himself. So he said, well, look at it. And Avela and Treifa were put in their state by the king himself. He's the one that caused them to die, and he's the one who caused them the illness. So you see that they're on a higher level, and therefore they are able to use for tefillin. So he said, well, then why can't you eat them? He said, well, you can't eat them because the Torah said you're not allowed to eat them. It says, call nevela. So the tzaddik, he said, you're saying good. We now begin the next Mishnah, which discusses the malacha of ma'abed. Ma'abed is a tanning hides, which was performed by salting animal skins until they became hard. So anything which involves salting something or applying the chemicals in a situation where the object you're salting becomes hard, it could be the malacha of ma'abed. Now, the Mishnah discusses making salt water. Later we will discuss salting vegetables. And then the Gemara will go from there into a discussion of using salty things such as salty water or other types of chemicals for refuah, for medicinal purposes. So first the Mishnah, it's a bit obscure, but together with the Gemara's explanation, it reads as follows. The Tanakhama says you are not allowed to make a lot of salt water on Shabbos, but you're allowed to make a little bit, just enough to dip your bread into. Rabbi Yossi says no, there is no difference between a little bit and a lot. The type of salt water that you are allowed to make is if you put oil in the water before the salt. That way the salt is counteracted by the oil. It doesn't mix well with the water and doesn't become very salty water. So the Gemara wants to know, Rabbi Yossi is saying there's no difference between a little and a lot. He's saying they're both forbidden salt water, or they're both permitted. So it's a machlokes. Rabbi Yehuda says he's saying that they're both permitted. He doesn't say that they're also. He just says there's no difference between a little and a lot. Rabbi says, what do you mean? He said the only type of salt water you're allowed to make is if you put in oil first. Obviously he's saying that if there's no oil, they're both forbidden, whether it's a little or a lot. Now Rav Yechanan supports Rabbi by bringing a brisa which expands on the language of the Mishnah. So if somebody wants to make brine, which is salt water which he used to pickle vegetables, it was stored in a broken kli because it had to be there for a long time. So he can make a small amount, just enough to dip his bread into. He should not make a large amount that he could use for pickling. You could also use it for adding to soup or something like that, but that's just a small amount. Now, Rabbi Yossi says, what do you mean? You say a halacha that a small amount is permitted and a large amount is forbidden. People will start thinking that every malacha out there you're allowed to do if it's just a small amount. So you can't. The only thing you're allowed to do is put in oil before the salt, and that way it's permitted because it will not mix well, it will not get too salty. Okay, now the Gemara moves on to discuss what type of salt water you're allowed to make, and then vegetables. So first of all, we have a brisa which says you're not allowed to make salt water which is very strong. What's that defined as? Rav Yosef Barabba and Rabba say that it's enough salt in the water that an egg will float in it, because the salt in the water increases its buoyancy characteristics. So how much salt is that? Abaye says if it's 2/3 salt, then it'll float. Now, such water for, you could use it for herring. You either mix it with the juice that seeps out of the herring, or you drink it together with the herring. Now, Rabbi Yehuda Bar Chaviva says you're not allowed to salt a radish or an egg on Shabbos. Rav Chizkiya and Abaye says you're not allowed to salt a radish because it's a vegetable, it becomes hardened, but an egg you are allowed to. Rav Nachman says, as far as radishes, I always used to salt radishes because I thought that the salt actually makes it worse. It does not improve the radish. Like Shmuel used to say, the best radish is a sharp one, and the salt leaches out the sharpness of it. But when Ula came, he told me that in Eretz Yisrael, they only salt one at a time. So then what I started to do was, instead of salting them, I would take the vegetable in my hand and I would dip it into salt. That way it's not a problem of me'abed. Okay, now Rabbi Yehuda Bar Chaviva says, an esrig, a radish, and an egg, if not for their outer layer, you would never be able to expel them from the system. They would remain there in a very constipated kind of situation. The outer layer of an egg refers to the white of the egg. Okay, now the Gemara goes back to salt water, and the Gemara says that Rav Dimi said, nobody ever drowned in the water of the Dead Sea. It's called Yama de Sedoim, the Sedoim Sea. Rav Yosef says, what do you mean? Nobody ever drowned, but other things did sink? A beam of wood ever sunk? So it seems like just like Sodom got flipped over, you got flipped over. What you said got flipped over. So Abaye said, no, he was saying even. Wood never sank in any waters of the world. People sink in waters of the world, but in the waters of Sodom, people are not able to sink because of the heavy salt content that is in there. Now, the Gemara wants to know, why is this important? What does it have to do with anything? So the Gemara says it's negeh to a halacha about using it for medicinal powers, and the Gemara says that the water of the Sodom Sea, the Dead Sea, is useful if you put it in your eye. It helps cure your eye. Now, today's water from the Dead Sea, I think, is too strong to put in your eye, but it could be that it was less then. And the Gemara relates, Ravin was walking after Rabbi Yirmiyah along the banks of the Sodom Sea, and he said, are you allowed to wash yourself in these waters on Shabbos? Is it considered to be medicinal or not? The halacha is that Chazal said you're not allowed to do anything medicinal on Shabbos because of Xera. You may come to grind powders, which would be forbidden. So the Gemara says that only applies to things which a normal person would not do. But if you're doing something and you have in mind that it should help heal you, but it's something that regular people also do, so then it's not a problem. Another way out of it is if you start it before Shabbos, as we shall see. So the Gemara says that he answered him, Rabbi Yirmiyah answered him, and he said you're allowed to, because it's a normal thing to go into these waters. And then he said, but are you allowed to put your face in the water and then open and close your eyes so that the water should go deeply into your eye? So he said, I don't know about that halacha, but I could tell you a different halacha. Rav Zera said, sometimes the name of Rav Mas and sometimes the name of Mar Ukva. You heard it from both of them. And they too said in the name of Shmuel's father and Levi. The following two things. One Shmuel's father said and one Levi said. Wine. Okay, one of them said as follows. You're allowed to put wine near your eye and on your eye, but you're not allowed to put it in your eye, which means you're not allowed to open and close the eye to bring the wine into it. And another thing which helps heal the eye is spit, saliva from somebody who just woke up and didn't eat anything yet. So that you're not allowed to. That even outside the eye, without opening and closing the eye to draw it in, you're not allowed to do that. So now the Gemara says, 1 second. One of these was said by Avud Shmuel, Shmuel's father. One was said by Levi. Which one is which? Probably Shmuel's father is the one who said about the wine. How do I know? Because I have a code where Shmuel said about wine that a person is allowed to soak bread in wine and put it on his eye. So he probably heard it from his father. So the Gemara says, well, what do you mean? Shmuel said the other thing also. He also said that about saliva you aren't allowed to have on your eye at all, even on the outside. So Shmuel obviously heard one of them from his father, one of them from Levi. So that doesn't prove anything. Okay. Now the Gemara goes on to other eye treatments. Mar Ukva said in the name of Shmuel, kilurin, which is a type of salve, or Rashi calls it a bandage that goes on the eye. If you prepare it, you soak this thing in water before Shabbos, so you started the treatment before Shabbos, you're allowed to put it on your eye even on Shabbos. You don't have to worry about the isser of applying medical treatments on Shabbos. Now the Gemara says that Bar Levoy was standing in front of Mar Ukva, and he saw that he applied this to his eye, and he was opening and closing the eye to draw it in. He said, what do you mean? That he never said you're allowed to do. He didn't say you're allowed to do that much. You're only allowed to put it on. To actually draw it in, you're not allowed to. Okay, now Rav Yanai sent a message to Mar Ukva, can you send me some of this kilor that Shmuel prepared for you and he sent to you? So he said, listen, I'm going to send it to you because I don't want you to think that I'm stingy, but you should just know that Shmuel said, better than that is to use a little radish in your eye or a little radish oil, and better than that is also if you wash your hands with warm water in the evenings, your hands and your feet with warm water in the evenings. That's better than any kilor that you have in the world. Now we have a brisa that spells this out. Rabbi Muni said in Rabbi Yehuda, a little bit of radish is in the morning is the best thing, and washing your hands and feet in the evenings is more effective than any kilor in the world. Now we also added you should always be careful not to touch any of the body openings with your hands before you wash 3 times each hand in the morning, netilas yadayim. And he said as follows, that anybody who will touch the hand should be cut off because it's going to cause all kinds of illnesses. A hand which touches the eye, cut it off because otherwise it make the eye blind. The nose, cut it off. If it touches the mouth, cut it off. The ear, a hole used for bloodletting, the urinal opening or the fecal opening, or even if it touches a barrel of beer, you should cut it off because if it'll do that again, it'll cause tremendous illness. It could cause blindness, it could cause the ear to go deaf, and it could cause the nose and the mouth to have a terrible smell.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.